Welcome back. So, this is Tonya with Nurses Speak, and I was just inspired to make a short video because I've been reading a few different posts recently and stories on several platforms, and just want to bring attention to my subscribers and those who may be listening for the first time with regards to Black women's health. And this is very important because obviously I'm a Black woman too. And so with there being a higher percentage of morbidity and mortality as it relates to Black women from pregnancy and childbirth, chronic conditions, and just general overall quality of health care management. It's really prudent upon us, particularly as nurses, that we not only educate but advocate for our families, our friends, our loved ones, our community at large. And I say this because we cannot rely on the established healthcare system. As you know, it's significantly flawed. It's profit-driven. Its foundation is in cost containment, with a horrific history of trauma and degradation and experimentation on Black and brown bodies. And I'm not going to go into those atrocities, but you don't have to go far to find out what they were and to what extent they occurred and where. But just so you know, there was an impact on many people, not only in these United States, but in other countries as well. You know, we can go into what may still be going on, for that matter, in Africa, South America, even places like Cuba, the Caribbean, our indigenous people here in the United States, and it goes on and on. And so we already know that there's no trust in this healthcare system. And so many of us really were forced to manage our health from what we learned from our ancestors, from our grandmothers and great-grandmothers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, and those who really had a more solid and experienced, let's say, relationship with the land, with plants and herbs, many of which they instructed us about, you know. I can just say personally, with my cultural background being from the Caribbean and Central America, that there's definitely a knowledge of what we can utilize from the earth, you know. And I'm just talking about basic things like mint and ginger, hibiscus, which we know as sorrel, you know, sea moss and thyme, pimento and nutmeg and cinnamon, and there's just so many things. Dandelion. I mean, it's right here. Lemongrass. And there's more and more and more, right? I'm not a herbalist. I don't pretend to be, but I appreciate that knowledge. And I know I'm going off on a tangent, but let me get back to what I was originally planning to talk about. And that was just to remind us, again, as nurses, as healthcare providers, even if you're not a nurse, right? If you have a background, educational, professional background in health of any kind, it's really important that we not only educate but advocate for those within our community, within our family. And even if it means communicating with them and asking them on a regular basis, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on with you? And being mindful and present long enough to listen, right? We learned this in nursing school a long time ago, not, just asking the person, how are you, and keeping it moving is not really authentic, right? Because you need to give the person time to respond. There needs to be an exchange there, for there to be enough space open for them to give more than a 1 or 2 word response. And if that's all they choose to share, that's fine as well. But it's really important that when they do begin to speak to us, that we have an open mind, a soft heart, and a willingness to listen. Because within that listening and within that openness of our heart space, we can not only hear, but we can also feel energetically what may be going on with an individual or even with the group of people, and it's not just about imparting information. It's also about holding the space, sharing, maintaining the confidentiality, building the trust that many in our community need from our healthcare providers. But the fact that they know us, they look like us, and for many of us, we may be the first generation of people in our families to receive professional education, degrees and licenses and certifications in areas of health. And so they may look to us, but as we know, we have humble people often who don't really want to ask, or who might feel intimidated to ask. And in that respect, I think it's important also to be approachable, be willing to answer questions, be willing to start a conversation. Now, if you're not a physician and you're not in a physician-patient relationship, I would caution against, giving medical advice or trying to diagnose someone, unless you're in that capacity to do so. But definitely guidance, sharing resources, even giving suggestions on where to look to find information or what may be helpful, and let the person choose the path that they would like to take with regard to participating in managing their own health. And again, to that point, participating in managing their health, that's a big one, where we really need to push for self-advocacy, for sovereignty, for agency within our community, knowing that they do have a right to be healthy. It's the natural order for all of creation to be healthy, to thrive, and to live, right? A healthy, prosperous life. And with health being really a true form of wealth, and so many of us being impoverished from having that health, that high level of health and wellness, we can see where, we're not just talking about financial poverty here, right? And it goes so far even into the mindset, into the way of thinking and believing, which is filled with lots of old programs and lies and propaganda. So again, part of what we have to be responsible to do is bring truth to our community, to enlighten those that are still in the dark. Can you change somebody's mind for them? No. But you can share information with them. You can bring attention to something they may not be aware of. You can advise them when they go to their healthcare providers to ask questions, to not just sit and receive information and be told what to do, but do some research before going to an appointment, right? Write down your questions and consider what all the options are. Ask for referrals, for second opinions, and for specialists to get more information. And if they're in an environment where there's a healthcare provider is unwilling to listen or does not allow space for their questions to be entertained or respectfully responded to, then one of the strategies might be to look for another provider, choose another provider, right? And I know in some rural areas that might be a challenge to find, because there are people who may be having to travel 50 or more miles just to get to a doctor. And sometimes that requires people to even rely more heavily on natural healing modalities, natural ways of maintaining and bringing about a health consciousness and a healthy way of being. So these are important things to keep in mind and to offer support, even if it means taking some time away from what we're doing to go with someone to a doctor's appointment, to say, you know what, if you'd like me to go, I will go with you, and be in the room with them and help ask questions and support. I remember there was a short time in my career when I was a workers' comp case manager. And it was a pretty brief contracted role that I had taken. And for many things about it, I didn't really like, but I will say this. What I learned from that and what was very important about that, well, let me just say, one of the roles within that position was to go to medical appointments with the person who was the employee who was on workers' compensation. And basically that was just to ensure that the person was getting the proper care, keeping their appointments, the provider was on track towards either recovery or rehabilitation, treatment, surgery, whatever the modality, therapy, whatever the modality was, within the, and there's certain specific criteria. I don't remember the name of it at this point, but there's criteria to follow for certain conditions, and those of you who are in healthcare, you might be familiar with it. It's along the lines of Millman Roberts type thing. And, so there were certain things, certain protocols and various treatments recommended for certain conditions, length of treatment, etc. And, the expected duration. But what I realized is that no matter, even if injuries that people sustained were similar, every single person's experience was different and unique. And nothing went along the timeline or the expectation that was in those established criteria. Many people just had, complications, needed longer duration of therapy, may even have needed surgery, multiple surgeries, you name it. It could be anything, really. And so, but one of the things that I realize is that people ask questions. In fact, I would ask questions, once the person gave permission. And this is another thing. It wasn't just assumed that I would go in the appointment with the person. Like, I could meet them at the appointment. I could speak with them. I could definitely meet with their provider, whether it be a physician or a surgeon or a therapist, and discuss the care plan, discuss what was the condition, what was the planned treatment, what was the timeline that they would have to be out of work, when is a potentially that they could go back to work, and this is what would have to be reported back to the employer as well. So just to give you a little insight of it, in case you might not be aware of how this works behind the scenes, but I would ask questions. If they would allow me in the exam room with them, with the doctor, or even in the post-examination consultation, we both ask questions, right? And I think that the employee / patient, same person, may have in some cases felt a sense of comfort knowing that someone else was there advocating for them. Now, mind you, in my role, I'm always advocating for the patient. Like, I'm not so concerned with the company or anything like that, or whether or not the person goes back to work in a month or 6 months or a year, because my focus is on what does this person need to heal. What do they need for a complete recovery, or as close to a complete recovery as they can possibly achieve, and that's the focus right there. Now, whether or not they intended to be on disability or never go back to work or couldn't go back to work or what have you, and again, it ranged. Some people were totally interested in returning to work, and some people were like, what, however long it takes, I'm going to take care of me. And so, whatever was most important to them, I was there to support that. And so, again, we can advocate for our community in various different ways. Now, that's in a capacity of work. But again, if you're doing this in your community or for your family members or loved ones, it's important that we're just there for them, right? That we don't hold the knowledge that we have within ourselves or only in our traditional nurse-patient roles. That we give as much as we can, share as much as we can, educate as much as we can, and advocate for those who may not share the knowledge or even have the strength at any given time to advocate for themselves. Because that can make the difference between a healthy, long life or a short and sudden death. And it's that real. It's that important. And so, on that note, until next time, be well, take good care of yourself, and know that you matter. What you do matters.